Welcome to In Search of the Divine. I'm Ann Thompson. This beautiful mosaic was done by a tile artist who we'll be speaking with later in this episode. We'll also talk to a painter, a textile artist, and a woodturner. All the pieces that we'll be looking at were commissioned by the Sisters of St. Joseph of Carondelet for Carondelet Village, where the retired sisters now reside. Not only do the sisters love art, but they have an appreciation for the important role it plays in blessing each of us when we look at these pieces. Stay tuned and we'll hear more. Bob Clague is a woodturner. He is also incredibly philosophical and reverent.
Ken Hoagie was the project manager for the press home side of Carondelet Village. And he knew that these trees were going to be taken down, and he was specifically thinking about the walnut trees. And he thought, well, maybe we can get some of that wood and Bob can do something with it that we could give back to the sisters. And I thought that just made a lot of sense to make prayer bowls for the sisters. And what I wanted it to be was a really smooth, sensual object to hold in the hands and to provide a focus, either a metaphorical focus of imagining things in the bowl in your prayers, or letting the bowl speak to you out of its grain or its beauty or its feel. It needed to be a highly tactile object, and I really love the shape that I came up with. I tried to make it a meditation while making the bowls. So that as I was turning each one, I would imagine them being held by a sister whom I'd never met. I could just imagine. And, hoped that they would have some meaning and just be held. That made it a very nice process for me. Especially the part about returning their own trees to them in a way that I hoped would be meaningful for them. And it turned out that it has been meaningful, and that has made me cry I don't know how many times. So it's pretty wonderful. I've been a woodworker for 25 years or so. I've been a wood turner for about 4.5. And I started with the old lathe I was telling you about. I just put a piece of wood in it one day, and I had some old tools that my dad had left me. And I started it and had it spinning, and I happened to make a nice cut that one day, and I was hooked. It's a very addictive sort of feeling. When I'm spinning a block of wood, it isn't just a block of wood that I get to make into whatever I want to make it. It determines a lot of what happens. I mean, I love trees in all their aspects. Trees they're so long lasting, and when you have a tree in your yard, you will have a relationship with that tree for however long you live there. Plus, it's been there and it's going to be there for the most part. So I think people trust trees. They're very steady. They also, they have so much beauty in their different shapes, and people come to relate with those shapes and the leaves and the bark and the smells of different trees. The differences between species of trees are amazing, and just the way that they cut and the way that they feel and the way they smell and the way they polish up, they're all different. And I think trees, they just have a different perspective. Part of it is that you're working with something that is much bigger, much longer lasting than I am, and that is a part of a natural world, and it lives in just a completely different way. So it reminds me that, the whole world isn't about me. I have sat at the base of many trees and had conversations with them, and I don't know if I'm really having a conversation with myself and using the tree as a metaphorical responder, or if I'm actually talking to the tree, but I don't know, it works for me. I use trees mostly from the urban forest that had to be taken down for one reason or another. Some of them died standing, some of them just got too big, or the neighbors didn't like them or whatever, and people took them down. And I love to take that wood. It's very fun to turn a piece of wood that was cut down that same day, because it's sopping wet, just spraying me with water, literally getting me soaking wet, and it cuts very, very easily. But you get to see inside the tree right then, and it's exciting. You get to make something hopefully beautiful out of it, and give it back to the person who lived with that tree. That's very rewarding. What I've learned in only 4.5 years, I've learned some to pay attention to my intuition about those things, that it is a better chooser about final forms and shapes and the feel of things than my head is. And so that's a spiritual practice, I think. It's nice to think that 20 years from now, that'll probably be even more developed and I'll be making even better choices that probably will have nothing to do with my head. And that's my big spiritual path, I think, is to get out of my head and live in connection with the world as it is, not with my ideas about it.
Painter Fredrick Somers' journey from dark to light is reflected in his work and his life.
Called a Song of Heaven, Let There Be Light. It's 6'8" wide and 9.5 foot tall. So this oak tree from a place near here that I paint comes from the water and in the middle of the earth and then up into the sky part of the painting, and it goes up into a Hubble telescope, galactic cloud, beautiful cloud in there. And I was going to be a radical avant-garde artist and go to New York and change the world. I was painting dead people, disemboweled bodies, guts spilling out, men and dead birds climbing up wombs.
Painter Fredrick Somers did change the world, particularly his own. Born into a family with an alcoholic father who disappeared for years at a time, both Fred and his sister spent years at an orphanage. He pursued his education against the turbulent anti-war 1960s, vividly recalling running in fear at a great demonstration at the university in Iowa City involving police, helicopters, and tear gas. His personal and professional canvas reflected pain, anger, and fear, but a series of experiences would change him and his art.
We were here in Northfield in the 70s teaching in the colleges, and there was something called the Charismatic Renewal with the Lutheran Church. And Avis and I had been attending, and Father Tom, and he was in Ann Arbor, or in Notre Dame, in one of the significant outpourings on the Catholic Church. And he came back, and we just said, man, Father Tom, something has happened this weekend to you, and we said we'd like to have that. And so he prayed for Avis and I, laid hands on us and prayed for us in Iowa City, and we didn't think anything happened, but we laughed for a half an hour that night. We had uncontrollable laughing and joy, just filled us that night in Iowa City, and life went on. My studio was the place of privacy, and I just like Tivia on Fiddler on the Roof, he talks to God. Well, I would talk, and I just kind of said, I'm a dead man. I'm going to be like my dad. I'm going to lose everything, my family. But I had more than I ever had with teaching. I was making more money, had a beautiful family. But this turmoil was so great. It was just a nightmare inside of me. And that night, something happened there, and the next day at college, my professor said, what happened to you this week? And I said, you're not going to tell someone. You've been weeping and crying, and you've been so frustrated and scared and tormented. And that I asked God to help me last night. I'm the minister of evangelism teaching Sunday school in a Lutheran church in town, and I'm in one of the prestigious schools in America. You're not going to tell someone that you're having a great struggle. But I said, what's going on? Why do you think something happened? He says, your mouth has changed. You're not cursing in your lectures this week. And my tongue had gotten changed by God that week. And so it was the beginning of kind of a wonderful and scary, because I had an identity of being this radical artist, And now all of a sudden, I had to deal with love and deal with things of beauty, and now I'd cry when I'd see beauty, and I'd cry when I'd see my children grow and this landscape. And I winter camped and hiked, and I was out in the landscape all the time, but it wasn't a subject. It was the place I went to be alone and do my thing. But now it was compelling. I wanted to paint this. And in those days, the landscape painting in America, there was not what there is right now. There is a renaissance in landscape painting in America, but in that time there wasn't. And so I just started wandering the fields around here and painting what I loved instead of what I was fearful and hated. I'm an overnight wonder, you know.
Today, Fred says he seeks to bring to others an experience of the beauty of light as it bathes creation and to point them to a pathway that reaches into eternity. His internationally recognized oil and pastel paintings are known for their peaceful sensitivity, reflecting themes from the land. Whether in intimate views of grass, rocks, and water with reflections of light and sky, or in spacious vistas of the countryside, he seeks to share the hidden places of nature. He also paints portraits. He and his wife Avis continue to live and work in Northfield, Minnesota, and Fredrick continues teaching workshops throughout the U.S. and Scandinavia. Tile artist Sheryl Tuorila creates everything from furniture to walls in her Minneapolis studio.
Carondelet was a piece that I did through an art consultant. She brought me, I did sketches for her of a design layout. Actually, we chose the colors together based on what was going on in the building. And then she brought me a box. She said, some of the people are interested in collecting materials that maybe you could use in the piece. But the thing that got really intense was there were a lot of notes in with the materials from the women saying, this is a stone from when my, mother went to visit Auschwitz and found, these stones. So, some of them we used those pieces in there. There were some intense stories in there, personal stories from people. They were very touching. So you just got that feel that this piece is going someplace where it's going to speak to people. I call my work designed random because it appears random, but it's very thought out, what I do. I think it's something that I'm driven to do for whatever reason. I didn't pursue this. It happened to me. Wow, that I've touched every single thing on there a few times too. When I'm cutting the tiles, when I'm putting them on the boards and glazing them, I'm touching them all with the brushes, and then putting them on the shelves to go in the kiln, firing them, taking them off the shelves, putting them away, and then finally working with them. And then when I grout them, I'm touching every single one and wiping the grout out from around them. I think that my work is an experience that's right then and there. I was just talking to my son about the fact that I don't make pictures. I make abstract art that is about color, texture, and design. So when that person stands in front of the piece, and I see it all the time at a show or in my studio, people touch it. They want to actually reach out and touch those shapes and the colors and the textures. Their eyes move through it. I just want them to have that kind of happy experience. To just forget about everything else for a minute, and kind of enjoy something right in front of your face. I always described it that when I'm cutting all those tiles, it's very meditative for me. And then when I go back and glaze them, You know, I just sit and I'll be glazing. And then when I actually work with them, it's very meditative too. So it's just like there's so many different levels to this work where it's about placing small pieces repeatedly, you know, filling areas and things like that, that it's interesting to me to know that when people sit and look at it, it's a meditative experience too when it's all done. I think this is really about life and how we flow through life and the people we meet. It's like I kind of get an attachment to each one of these little pieces in a way. Like if I accidentally drop one, I have to find it because I feel like that is its own little individual part of this. So we're all flowing through this life together, and sometimes it gets really tight in some of the spots and then it opens up again, and you know, we're touching a lot of people and meeting a lot of people and sharing experiences with them for a little while, and then sometimes they're gone for whatever reason. But I'm very thankful that it's something that I get to do, because I think a lot of people don't enjoy what they do, and I really enjoy this.
This is a story of divine intervention that weaves its way across continents, races, genders, beliefs, and languages.
Yo he sido huérfano de los 8 años, de los 7 años. Cuando yo tenía 7
When I was 7 years old, my father died.
a los 8 años,
At 8 years old, my mother died.
To survive, Wilbur Quespe Huaman, as explained through interpreter Sister Agatha Grossman, ended up providing slave labor for a family in the jungles near his home.
empezaba a maltratar,
They didn't treat him very well.
molesta que sale con su escoba y
The wife began to hit him and beat him
corría.
with a broom.
Señora me agarra,
And she grabbed me
oro me pegó.
and beat me
Todo
all
escobazo, en
sides.
eso me tira en la cara una escoba y
She hit me on the nose.
just
Nose was bleeding.
He literally ended up living in a tree.
El momento más
Most
difícil,
difficult time was when I was sleeping in the tree. Didn't have any place to sleep.
ese es lo más difícil.
That was the most difficult.
Cuando
Didn't have food. I didn't have clothes. No place to sleep.
un perro sin dueño, algo así. O sea,
I felt like a dog without an owner.
había momentos que yo quería morir.
Yeah, I wanted to die. He said that's the way I felt.
Wilbur eventually made his way to a nearby town where a kindly woman introduced him to a brother he did not know.
Entonces la
And
señora
the lady said, well, why don't you two talk to each other?
Entonces,
And they asked, well, why?
entonces la señora nos dice que ustedes son hermanos.
And so the lady told us we were brothers.
Él estaba-
So he told me he was working in Santa Ana in tapestry.
Entonces él me,
I mean, he took me where he was working.
por eso
And
aprendí.
that's how I learned how to do tapestry.
Wilbur's personal trials were playing out while the entire region was being pulled apart by terrorists. With many of the men in his village murdered, Wilbur, like many other indigenous weavers, made his way to the shanty towns outside of Lima. There he met his wife, started a family, and continued weaving his way out of poverty. A continent away, passionately committed to saving a dying art form, was Minnesotan Melanie Ebertz.
I was traveling around Peru since the mid-'80s and trying to start a weaving business. I was drawn to craft. I wanted to learn how to weave. I was an explorer, and I was very drawn to indigenous culture, and indigenous people weave in Peru. So I quickly became enamored and really in awe of this craft, and also realized that it was very hard to find the weavers themselves because they were dispersed in these shanty towns outside of Lima.
Was it divine intervention that drew the two together?
And I was walking through the neighborhood where he was weaving, and I saw him down a long alley sitting at the loom, and he had a very complicated rug on his loom like this design here. Felt like I finally met the person I was looking for to go forward and further the craft. So what I didn't know what it was his last day of weaving.
Unable to make a living, Wilbur decided to become a laborer, carrying bags of goods for women at the market. Pressed for time, Melanie promised Wilbur she would return.
And mind you, he's illiterate, so he sketched out a little address for me on scratch paper, and that's what I had to go on. There's no phone, no email. And so a week later, or 10 days later, I'm back in Lima, and I'm looking at this little scratch paper and thinking, how am I really ever going to find it? That was another miraculous moment that we actually, I found him, and he was waiting for me. He had been waiting for me since the day I met him. And again, I didn't know that. I didn't know what his predicament was. I didn't know it was his last day of weaving, and he had 4 kids, and he was living in a straw house and waiting for me to come.
It's been almost 20 years since they began to work together.
We're kind of a funny pair.
He's become a successful master craftsman.
Thanks be to God for her. I came to Minneapolis. Wherever we're invited, we go to tell the story and to demonstrate the work, the art. People in Minneapolis have always bought my work. Each time I come, I bring special tapestries to sell directly. She sells for him. Happily sells what he makes, right?
So now you will better understand the tapestry he calls the lost child, Niño Perdido.
The piece that you have in the lobby, the Niño Perdido, he actually is in the tree. So he wove himself into the tree. The wildlife, the flora, fauna was all from that jungle area. You'll see that there's a snake in the tree as well. The snake was a friendly companion. And if you look at it, it does look quite friendly. That became his family, really.
He got the idea of doing the tapestry of the child lost in the jungle when he was in Lima. It was the first prize of the contest that they had of weavers.
Today, the master weaver is circumspect about his miraculous journey.
Now that I think about it, God was with me all the time. I think that God had a special plan for me. I think that he was with me and took care of me.
Thanks for joining us on this episode of In Search of the Divine. I hope you enjoyed it as much as we did, and I hope you have a new appreciation for the connection between art and spirit. Take care.